This is why skipping detention might be a good idea. When I was in high school, I slacked off a lot. My junior year, my math teacher was pretty upset by this. Once during a parent-teacher meeting, he told my mom that I wasn't doing as well as I could and called me lazy. My mom agreed and stated that she wouldn't blame him if he pushed and punished me to work harder. From this day on, he did exactly that, always questioning me before anyone else and always sat next to me during exercises. This is when my classmates started realizing that he was a little obsessed with me and started teasing me about it. Right before Christmas break, he threw us a surprise party with chocolates and mock champagne. He poured me an extra glass and congratulated me for doing better. I drank the first glass he gave me, but not the second because I'm diabetic and had already had too much chocolate. During the next class, I felt extremely sick and almost fainted. I spent the rest of the day in the nurse's office and chalked it up to eating too much candy. A few weeks later, I failed a math test. He became extremely angry and yelled at me in front of everyone. The look in his eyes chilled me and I cried. He gave me detention but scheduled it hours later than the usual time and said he would personally be there as well. When I showed up, it was getting dark already and I noticed I was the only student there. Something felt off and a feeling deep inside my gut was pushing me to skip. Right when I decided to skip, I look over and see him walking towards me. Part 2 of why skipping detention might be a good idea. As he walked towards me, I was getting nervous. I told him that I had an emergency and I had to go, but I would email the school and reschedule later. Right after this, I ran off. As I was running away, he yelled at me and told me that I had to obey him and come to detention or he'd call my parents. At this moment, I didn't care. The feeling in my gut kept growing, so I sprinted to the bus and went home. I was afraid that he'd call my parents, but my parents greeted me normally when I got home, so I assumed he didn't. The next day, I was expecting to get an earful, but he wasn't there, and as weeks passed, he never came back. Then a shrink came to our class and asked if he'd like to talk about our math teacher, but no one knew why. Fast forward a few years later when I became a teacher and started chatting with my coworker. I mentioned his name, speaking to her about my weird, bizarre teacher and how I skipped attention. That's when one of the oldest workers there went pale hearing his name. It turns out a few days after I skipped attention, my math teacher was arrested for downloading child you-know-what from the dark web. He also had tons of snuff videos doing terrible things to children and teens. Now I always wonder what would have happened if I hadn't followed my gut instincts and stayed for detention that day with just me and him in that classroom.
Story time. My toxic best friend outed me to the entire school. So one day, one of my best friends from a neighboring school decided to move to my school, and she was extremely upset because her best friend over there came out as bi. So I ended up using this as an opportunity to come out bi as well. And she was like, well, it's okay for you. I just got really close to her. We'll call the girl Becky because no one likes a Becky. And we can call her friend Heather. So fast forward to after the situation had calmed down, we decided to all go prom dress shopping. So Heather and I were talking and we really hit it off. And I think Becky legitimately forgot about our sexuality because we were all talking about how much we have in common and we brought that up as well. She just looked at us and was like, oh, I forgot about that. And she just shrugged it off. But we continued to hang out for a few weeks. One of these weekends, we all went to church together and the sermon was about how God accepts you no matter what your sexuality is. But of course, Becky turns around to us and says that Heather and I could never date because it would F everything up. Later that day, Heather actually ended up admitting that she had feelings for me, and this is when Becky lost it. Stay tuned for part 2 and follow me on Instagram. Part 2 of my toxic best friend outing me to the entire school. So at the beach later that day, Heather and I decided to tell Becky how we felt. She freaked and wouldn't talk to us and locked herself in the bathroom. And we had to tell her that it's fine, we won't date, just so she would let herself out. I thought she was being entirely selfish, not wanting her best friends to be happy. And then she literally took my phone and went through all of our texts together. She woke up the next day all ready for Heather and I to be together and completely apologized. And then when we went to the mall that day, she walked away from us to go look at the hot guys, but then turned around and got pissed at us for falling behind. And this is why she said she didn't want us to date, yet we weren't even dating. She said she felt like she was gonna have to choose between Heather and I because of the whole situation, and I guess she just picked me. Becky became extremely codependent and didn't want to leave my side. She was pissed if I spent time with anyone else and basically forced Heather out of my life. I ended up running into Heather and inviting her to my 18th birthday, and this is when Becky had her massive breakdown. At my birthday, she outed me to everyone at the party, my mom, and Heather's mom as well. My Insta is linked below for more content. Story time about how I got an insane stalker from working at a strip club and professionally cuddling. Professionally cuddling is like platonic touch therapy. I'm essentially paid $100 an hour to listen to clients vent and non-sexually cuddle them. I met lots of different clients, both good and bad. You can always tell who's good or bad by their karma. A karma is like a review. One of my clients who was especially respectful was named George. And I will tell you why George is very sus later on. He was really chill and he would take me out to do anything I wanted to do, such as restaurants or mini golfing. Even if we weren't cuddling, he'd still pay me. Gotta get that bag. While I did spend a lot of my time with him, I did have other clients. One person after him that we'll call Tim left a review on my karma, saying that I was the best cuddler. The next day, I woke up to the site banning me for inappropriate behavior. There was fake inappropriate screenshots sent in, where someone was clearly using photos you could easily find on my Instagram. And the text literally said, "I'll even let you touch my butt." Like, who even talks like that? Then Tim sent me a screenshot of him getting a message from a random number. That's when I realized it may have had to do with his review. I quickly got my account back because I let the site know I was being harassed, but this is when things got worse. Stay tuned for part 2 and follow me on Instagram. Story time about my crazy stalker that I got from professionally cuddling and working at a strip club. So not long after I got my band account back, I received a message from a random number telling me to delete my account by 10 p.m. that night, or else they would tell my family that I was professionally cuddling. They sent my mom, dad, and stepmom's number in the text, so I knew they were serious. I was like, who are you and why are you doing this? And they claimed that they were an old friend from high school and that they were extremely concerned about me and that the old me wouldn't have done this. This didn't sound like anyone I knew, but I decided that I was just going to go ahead and tell my parents because I did not want anyone holding anything over me. So I let my parents know and they were extremely supportive. And when I didn't delete my account and they reached out, my mom clapped back at this person and said if they were actually my friend, they would support me and not conceal their identity. Fast forward a little bit, I started working at a strip club. I thought the stalker stuff was done. Not long after I liked the Facebook page of the strip club I was working at, I received a text from a random number asking if I worked at that strip club with a photo of me from that Facebook page. This is when I got an even bigger threat than before. Stay tuned for the next part and follow me on Instagram.
Story time about why my mom kicked me out when I was 16. So a little background information. This had all started as soon as my dad left my mom and I. I was like 13 around the time. Well, ever since then, my mom would have different guys in and out of the house all the time. Like, we were lucky if a month went by and she was still with the same dude. Which, I mean, I kind of get it because my dad did leave us for a woman that he had started another family with. But at the same time, it was just a whole mess. Anyway, so she had got with this new guy and we're gonna call him Tyler. And by the way, the dudes that she would date, they would literally live at our house. Anyway, so a week after he moved in, I started getting really close to him, which usually never happens. Usually I would try to keep my distance because I knew how wrong it was of her having all these different guys in the house when I'm only 16. Anyways, every time that my mom would go to work, he would invite me to go see a movie and he would just be really flirty with me. And he was only 6 years older than me, and my mom was 32. You do the math. Anyways, like for part 2. Part 2 about why my mom kicked me out when I was 16. So like I said, the guy was being super flirty with me, inviting me to the movies when my mom wasn't home and all that stuff. Well, then it led to more than just that. By the way, this guy did not have a job, so he was home with me 24/7. And I was doing online school. So we were in the house by ourselves, 12 hours a day, 5 days a week. Anyways, like I said, it led to more and we started doing the nasty and stuff. Ew, just, yeah. Well, the one day after we got done doing the nasty in my mom's room, we had fell asleep. And yes, we did not have clothes on. Well, at 2 in the morning, I hear someone pounding on the bedroom door. And my mom worked night shifts. So we get up, he hurries up and gets dressed and tells me to hide under the bed. And he opens the door and it's my mom's sister. My sister literally lived in the apartment next door. And she was like, oh yeah, neither of you were answering the phone. So she wanted me to check on you guys. Like, where's Elena? And I'm still under the bed naked, like for part 3.
The story was submitted to me by a follower who would like to remain anonymous. When I was 14, I had a best friend named Lucy. And we had one of those friendships where we were really close really quickly, which I now know is a red flag and usually a sign of a toxic friendship. But I was too young to know this then. Our favorite thing to do together was hang out at the mall. Our parents would let us go alone as long as we abided to one rule. We had to stay together at all times. And we were always pretty good about that. One night we were having a sleepover at Lucy's house and her Uncle Mike came over for dinner. Uncle Mike was pretty loud and goofy. He showed us like 8 magic tricks that night. I liked him. He was fun. But as I was helping clear dishes after dinner, I overheard Mike and Lucy's mom having a hushed conversation in the kitchen. She was like, you've had too much to drink. Why don't you just spend the night? So Mike ended up sleeping over that night too. Right before going to sleep, Lucy's mom came into the bedroom and she told us to remember to shut the bedroom door before falling asleep. When I asked Lucy why she said that, Lucy just shrugged and said, I don't know. But we made sure the bedroom door was shut just like she asked. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the feeling of someone tickling my feet. So I was having a sleepover at Lucy's house and I woke up in the middle of the night to someone or something tickling my feet. I scream and then I hear shuffling. Lucy wakes up and she's like, what's wrong? And I tell her that something was tickling my feet, but she doesn't believe me. I'm like, well, why is the door open? We shut it before we went to sleep. And she goes, relax. Sometimes it happens because there's a draft in the house. And I tell her that I think it was her uncle who was tickling my feet and she goes, oh, come on, you're hallucinating. And honestly, at the time I had a bad feeling about Lucy's reaction. It felt like she was gaslighting me and I had no idea why. A few weekends later, Lucy and I are chilling at the mall on a Saturday afternoon. My parents let us go to the mall together alone, but their one rule is that we have to stay together the whole time. They call it the buddy system. So that day, Lucy's acting weird. She keeps looking around nervously and checking her phone. She says she has to go to the bathroom, and I'm like, okay, I'll go with you. Because we always go together, even if the other person didn't have to pee. And Lucy's like, no, I'll go alone. I'll be quick. And I'm like, no, I'll just go with you. And she snaps really aggressively, and she's like, just stay here. And then she spins around and sprints away from me. So Lucy's running away from me in the mall. I sprint after her. She's super fast. She rounds a corner and then I can't find her after that. I start crying. I have no idea why my best friend ran away from me. So I sit down on a bench in the mall. I'm still crying, really overwhelmed. Then I hear someone say my name. So I look up and it's Lucy's uncle, Uncle Mike. He asks what's wrong and I tell him. He's being super nice and comforting. And then he starts rubbing my back, which made me uncomfortable, but I don't say anything. Then he offers to give me a ride home. And I say, no, I can just call my parents. And he goes, just let me give you a ride, come on. But the way he said it the second time gave me goosebumps. It was aggressive, like he wasn't asking me, he was telling me. So I stand up and step away from him and say, you're making me uncomfortable, I'm calling my parents. Mike glares at me, and then he says, no one likes a tease. And he walks away. I told my parents what happened and they immediately called Lucy's parents. Apparently, Uncle Mike had taken a liking to me, and he found out that I was going to be at the mall that day with Lucy, and Mike paid her $100 to run away and leave me alone with him. He told Lucy that I liked him too, and that she was being a good friend by giving us alone time. I never spoke to Lucy again after that.